Welcome. Today we'll be speaking with interior designer Bonnie Toland. Bonnie, tell us a little bit about yourself and your interest in the psychology of design.
I'll tell you that I'm actually now a strategist. So I was an interior designer for about 13 years, and I recently transferred into strategy. And part of the reason why I've done it is because I'm in doing the upfront work now. So I'm doing sort of the heavy lift in the beginning to get a project on the right track.
Hmm.
I'm from Alaska originally, but I've lived in, oh gosh, 5 different regions of the US: the Northeast, the Southwest, the Northwest, and the Southeast, and then also Alaska. So I feel that I know the country pretty well. And then I've also lived in about 4 continents. So I've touched a lot of things have touched me, I should say,
Yeah,
in terms of
exactly.
what has built my experience and my worldview.
Good. Yeah. And as a strategist, do you do a lot of project management? Is that a big part of what you're doing?
No, what we do is we try to help clients make informed decisions about space. And so it's really getting the purpose of a design, a purpose of a project clear. And I think part of why I wanted to go into strategy is because there are too many times I've been on projects where that purpose has been really ambiguous, and then it's like pulling teeth to get a design to come through, because nobody really knows why they're doing it to begin with, or what they're trying to achieve, or um, and so our job really is to get everybody on the same page.
Yeah, and that I'm sure lends a lot into the psychology of how you want the project to unfold and what elements are important to focus on. And tell us a little bit about that. What are some of the design elements you feel affect how we as humans perceive and respond to design?
Well, I think there are a couple of big ones. There's the scale of design. I think when you can see when things are misscaled,
Mm,
you know, like, and you think of and how that affects how you feel and how you relate to your environment. Like, think of, for example, the scale of fascist architecture. Like, it's made to make sure that people feel small and powerless. So
mm.
when you're in at the base of a fascist building, you feel insignificant, and that's not accidental. Um, I think the way that movement flows through a space is really like how a space is organized, and how the sequences of space is really important to how people feel. Like, you think about a hospital experience and how you, like, what are the steps that you go through when you go from the beginning of your journey to the end of your experience, and how that moves through for a person is huge in terms of the psychological effect of space.
Mhm.
I mean, space is like a mirror to us. It's a mirror to what we value. It reflects also what we don't value. Like, we don't invest in spaces we don't care about. So we don't invest. You can clearly see what we don't care about as a society, because we're not investing in those spaces. Um, I find it's like a truth teller in a sense. Like, you can walk into a community or an organization or a city and know pretty quickly what's important to that group
Mhm.
and what isn't important to that group. Um, and but what's really empowering about that is that also gives you an opportunity um, to shift that. So if you come in, and people are saying, "Oh, we really care about equity," or "We really care about, I don't know, wellness and well-being," or "We really care about," I don't know, whatever, name your flavor,
Mhm.
you can say, well, that's not what your space is telling me. And so how can we align your space with your values, or with what you want your space to communicate?
Yeah, we're seeing more and more the areas of the US are looking more and more similar instead of really seeing that local flavor. We're seeing more of the same design patterns coming through in all cities, the same buildings being built, the same patterns being used. And we've talked a little bit about this before about the local culture that comes into it. And we're starting to lose some of that. And how do you feel about that? How do you feel about the local styles and what you're seeing?
I think it's a big question because it's happening globally as well. I think there's a sort of a tendency towards homogeneity, and a lot of is lost in that, when we um, and we're unconscious of it. I think there's a lot of we just do it. We don't even think about it. And I think that comes back to your what we were talking about with hyper localization. And I feel like it's actually a form of resistance in some way. Like, and it has to be a conscious decision. It has to be something that you put effort into, because if you do go just with what is happening, you're more likely to end up with this sort of a single narrative when it comes to space. And you'll see that across our country, and you'll see it internationally as well. And particularly with workplace design, which is what I've been doing for the past, I don't know, 13, 14, whatever many years, is that it is, I mean, you have cases where you have design guidelines that are rolled out globally. And of course, those guidelines are based on, the practices and preferences of wherever the headquarters is,
Mhm.
which is, you know, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a US city, maybe a European city. Um, and so you have it baked in to have sort of this homogeneous approach to especially to office design. And
Mhm.
this will seem, I don't know if I'm going to communicate this well, but this will seem like an odd parallel to draw, but it reminds me of the way that churches were rolled out in across the globe, and how that was sort of a mindset, a philosophy, or approach to spirituality, or to, that, like, didn't always fit well within local communities. And what
Mhm.
I find fascinating is how local communities managed in some cases to adapt and
Mhm.
to localize those spaces. Um, but I feel like that's sort of happening today with office spaces. Like, it's like this particular mindset, mentality, approach to life and work that is being rolled out everywhere without
And
a lot of thought.
right, exactly. Without a lot of thought, it kind of seems like it's the trends that keep coming and going, and we see that, of course, in residential. We've always seen the trends come and go, but we see that in offices now. We've gone from offices and enclosed spaces. Before that, a lot of times there were big open spaces where there were just desks in rows. We went to the cubicle, the sea of cubicles. And now, of course, we're going back more into that, putting all the desks in a cluster in big open spaces. And we see those dynamics and how it works for some and it doesn't work for others, but everybody tends to adapt these same ideas and concepts in our homes or businesses, and it doesn't always work out, which I think is part of the reason why these trends keep cycling back and forth, is because a trend doesn't work for everybody. A trend is something that needs to be more personalized to
Mm.
what you see locally, and that goes back to the local, that understanding your local culture and understanding what you have to work with as far as personalities, cultural, society, things of that
Well,
nature.
and it's always, how do you say, it's always a negotiated process, because in an upfront kind of way, it doesn't appear to be a very profitable proposition, because if you're going to be hyper local, that means you're going to need to put in some effort and time. And time, of course, costs money. And it's going to be, it's going to involve more research and engagement and
Mhm.
these kinds of things. And so you don't see it as being a benefit in terms of business and profitability. However, the backside of that is that if the outcome is spaces that speak to people the way that they want to be spoken to,
Mhm.
that reflect the way that they want to live or work or experience a space, then that space will function better for them. That
Mhm.
and those people will be more comfortable and happier in those spaces, and so you have a better outcome.
Mhm.
But it's difficult to make the business case when you're looking at dollars and cents in terms of how much it costs to put together a project, because we're always in a rush there.
Mhm.
And it's always easy to do what's been done before rather than trying to really, think things through.
It is, yeah. And even when we look at residential design, the Building Biology Institute, they really put down the part where we're always focusing on the financial return of resale or monetary investment with our homes, that we're not looking at it, how is this home going to benefit me in a psychological way, in a health way? How is this home going to work for my family in the long term? And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of turnover. People are leaving, whether it's jobs or homes. We see people more transient than they used to be. And I think that is a big part of it. The homes just, they don't work and they don't function for them. Instead of trying to make that home function in a way that would be optimal, they're instead thinking, well, I want to resell. If I put in blue flooring that may not sell, I'm going to put in brown flooring. So all those things end up kind of becoming part of the culture, whether we mean to or not. And we used to do more vernacular design where you would see some areas would be very colorful, some areas would be very bright and bold, where others would be less so. And that was just part of the cultural traditions of the area. And now we're just kind of seeing this monochrome with homeowners associations and different requirements in buildings. When you go into commercial areas, they have to have certain paints or certain requirements. So it's really changing our environment, and psychologically, I don't think that's benefiting us. It's not inspiring us to want to do or be more right now.
And beyond like sort of the aesthetic localization, also how does the space dictate the use?
Mm,
One thing I really love about looking at historic homes is that they're set up for a different type of socializing. They're set up for a different sequence of life, in
mm,
a sense. I remember having a really interesting conversation about front yard versus backyard culture. I
mm,
think did we mention that? Like, for example, Chicago might have a very front yard culture where you sit on the porch and you chat with people that walking down the street, and
mm,
you're a part of that streetscape, so to speak. And then you have a backyard culture, like a lot of, for example, Seattle might be more of a backyard culture where everything is taking place in the fenced-in yard in the back, and you need an invitation to participate, and it's
mm,
it's like behind closed doors. Um, and the prominence of the car, the prominence of the television, these things really shift the way we design our spaces, because we're like, how many houses do you drive up, or you go up to, you drive up to, or you walk up to, and the first thing you see is the big garage where you put your car.
right.
That's how you're greeted. Um, but you also think about in terms of social space, or in terms of how do you want to connect to your neighborhood, your neighbors, your neighborhood,
Mhm,
your community, and how does the house facilitate that?
mhm,
Um, like I lived in the Arab world for quite a long time, and the houses, it's interesting because the way that houses are um, divided up or sequenced is different than how houses are divided up in sequence. Like an open plan wouldn't make sense in a lot of Arab homes, because there's a very clear line between public space that you are hosting in and private space that is private, that you might know someone for many years and never see where they sleep, because
mhm.
that's their private space, where you're not going to get a tour of their house, for example, like we tend
Right.
to do. um, but the way that like so much energy is put into creating this environment for hosting, because that's such a huge part
Mm,
of community life, and that's where you spend the bulk of your time, is going to each other's homes and hosting each other. And there's a whole sequence for how to host somebody, what you bring them and when, and how how you facilitate that experience. And so it makes sense that they're going to think about their home design differently than how we would think of our homes.
mhm,
And yet, what's exciting is that it's an opportunity for us to also be reflective and self-critical, even, of what what does my space facilitate, or what doesn't it facilitate?
mhm,
What does it invite, or what doesn't it invite? And what do I want it to invite? Like, do I want to have gatherings in my home? Does my home lend itself to that? You know, um,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing that we've moved now to this. I would say a trend of open floor plans, and you're right. It doesn't work for everybody. For one thing, the noise is a huge issue. Anybody who's lived in them knows that you know what everybody is doing in the house because everything is open to all the different areas, and that ends up being an issue that people don't have their separated space, and you can hear the TV in a room where maybe you're studying, or you want
Hmm.
some separation, some division. Also, the kitchen can be a very personal area. It can be messy. It can have
Smelly.
right, have smells, have different things going on that maybe you're preparing food or having something sit out long term. So you don't always want your company going in there. But now in our Western culture, it's everything is open, and the kitchen is the area where people gather. But that
Hmm.
in traditionally, even here in this United States, in this area, it wasn't always the case. You know, the kitchen would be closed off. People would be, canning in there and doing other things, other tasks that may have been messy or they didn't want everybody involved with. So that is a big difference. And I do see some of that going back now where people are realizing that everything being open, it doesn't always work as well as you anticipated. So closing off a kitchen or closing off another room might be more optimal for a lot of families.
Yeah, yeah. There was something about what you were saying too about the transient sort of nature of how we're living these days, and
Yeah,
um, not really investing in a place as much as maybe we have in the past. Um, and some of that just because we have it's more accessible to us to move, whereas in the past it really wasn't as accessible. But there's also a tendency to live very much in the abstract, um, and not like you can, how do I say this? You can basically not engage with your street, with your
right.
neighborhood, with you can really disengage, and
Mhm.
maybe you drive to work, or maybe um and maybe a lot of even your work might be on a virtual platform, or you're able to sort of live in this abstraction that disconnects you from really your lived experience.
Mhm.
And so you wonder, are you actually living? Because you're not
Right.
even, you're not in your body, and you're not
Mhm.
um smelling the air, feeling the breeze, hearing the birds, you know
Right.
touching the lamp post or whatever it is that you
Yeah.
know kicking the rocks.
Yeah. Yeah.
I-
We've just discussed that previously, that bio experience of actually immersing with your culture and in your environment. And growing up in the country on a farm, I was very much a part of my environment. I knew
yeah,
my environment well. And as you had mentioned before, you were the same way, that you got out
yeah,
into nature, you explored, and now we do live in these homes. And I find it very strange actually to live in a neighborhood where I can reach out and touch the neighbor's home, but I don't know the neighbor. It's a very odd experience. I've
yeah,
never even met them or seen them because, they may have moved in a year ago, but we never interact. It's a very
yeah.
different experience.
And because we're living in this abstract world that really has
Yeah.
no place. I mean, it doesn't have it doesn't have a location where it lives. It's up here in the ether, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it's stealing from us. It's stealing that lived experience from us, which is really that connection that we have with each other, that connection that we have with our local environment. And and so that was what's going to inform spaces that really nourish us. um,
Right.
and so we end up in these kind of non-place spaces that don't speak any language necessarily. They speak the language of the abstract. They don't speak
Right.
your language. uh,
Yes. Yeah. And as they become more technological in nature, I think we become more and more disconnected as the lights go on as we walk in the door. We're not flipping a switch to even turn on the light anymore. We become so disconnected with our space and with our environment. We don't have any real sensory connection to it anymore.
no, no. And it was telling you about the book I was reading, an old book. I'm sure if the older people who listen to your podcast will know, of Edward T. Hall. He was a social anthropologist in the 1960s. And he talked about cultures being sensory rich or sensory poor. Um, and American, even in the 60s, he described Americans as having a sensory poor culture, generally speaking. Um, and really not, and it's sort of like this kinesthetic deprivation is what he called it, that we're
Yeah.
kinesthetically deprived. And it's interesting because we are not even aware of that because we don't have anything to compare it to.
Yeah.
So, but we're not in our bodies very much. We are in this abstract world, so much abstract world of intellect and but the home in particular is a very it's a very sensory rich it can be a very sensory rich experience. It can be, and like we were saying before, that spaces tell the truth. They do not lie.
Right.
So this can be the potential for your home to really be your refuge, the potential for your home to be that gathering space, that to be that hub for you and for your loved ones. Um, it's a potential that needs realization, that I think a lot of people are so out of touch with their own experience that it's
Mhm.
very difficult for them to imagine that or create that or understand what that would mean. Um, and I find that in commercial design as well,
Mhm.
like that we are creating these spaces that are so out of touch with their places and their
Right.
people. And um, and it takes, I think it takes some real effort and some real intentionality to bring it back. And
Yeah. I agree. And going back to that vernacular design, and as you had mentioned before, it is more challenging. It does take more work, and it does enrich a location. It enriches an environment around the building because local tradesmen have been the source for materials. Local materials come into play instead of outsourcing to, say, another country. Italian marbles, beautiful, but maybe it's not the best suited for the middle of Texas or someplace like that. Whereas we can bring in very rich local materials and beautiful sourcing around here. It's also better for the environment. It's better for the people that they're more involved in the even going down to the microbiome. Our microbiome is a result of our environment, and it's a
right,
huge part of our physical health. And what we're exposed to makes a big difference. And understanding the differences between those is something we've just lost. We just don't have that knowledge anymore. A lot of that is just escaping, and we see design as trends, and we go to magazines and we go to conferences to find out what's the latest thing, what's everybody doing, instead of what suits us, what does our heart say that we need to have as far as uh, space or aesthetics or whatever it happens to be for our environment, for our health, for healing.
right, right. And it's an investment, I think. Like I think we can easily talk about sort of the pitfalls of where we are right now,
Yeah.
culturally, socially, in terms of our families and all of these different pieces. Um, and finding our way out of that is, I think, it's investing in ourselves, it's investing in each other.
Mhm.
It's because you don't, maybe you feel that there isn't local culture. What do you do to strengthen what is local? And how do you grow that where you are? And how do you invest in that place yourself? And how do you invest in yourself, you know,
Right.
so that you're not just in that abstraction that we are all so easily sucked into.
Yeah, and I see it more in the small local areas, the small cities, the small towns. I still see some of that culture, but once we go into, we live near Austin. Once we go into Austin, I'm not seeing as much of that anymore. It's just becoming the skyscrapers. And Austin, before they had the Keep Austin, Keep Austin. I can't even think the tagline now, but it was very a unique city. It was very
Yeah.
different from others. It was keep Austin weird. That was what it was, because it was very dynamic. A lot of artists, a lot of music, a lot of cultures coming together,
Mm.
and we still have that, but it's definitely just becoming more of the big city, more of the predictable box stores, chains,
Hmm.
things that you see
Hmm.
all over.
Yeah, and that seems to be sort of the default, you
It
know,
is.
like there is sort of this trend to homogenization, and you see that globally, and like it ends up being that the urban experience is the same, um,
Yeah.
whether you're in Singapore or Dubai or Sydney or
Yeah.
Tokyo or Berlin, or I mean the cities have different personalities, but they're becoming more and more just urban, the same.
They are, yeah. And I would like to see more. I know small towns are starting to revitalize, but I would like to see more of that, because I don't know that everybody's getting that personal experience or that true authentic experience inside of a big city. I think that moving away from that big experience really authenticates the experience of nature, and going out into your
Yeah.
environment and just even having a yard. I see so many places that have these teeny tiny yards. We drive by and there's almost no yard to speak of, and you just don't really feel the nature. You don't feel, it's hard to feel alive when you're not out and in the, like you said, the wind on your face, and really feeling the sun and understanding there's more to it than just what's inside, or electronics, all these things that we tend to spend so much time with now.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting growing up in Alaska. You know, I lived in an environment that was a lot more that, how do I say, it dictated our lives much more directly than pretty much anywhere else I've lived, in the sense that my town is about 30,000 people, which is a large for Alaska. It's the capital city. Um, but for much of my life, my yard was just the mountain. We were the last road before the mountain, and the kind of um, it's interesting. I think anyone who lives sort of in the periphery or outside of the major hubs, there is often a sense of um, inadequacy, or we're not like what we have isn't valuable. What is valuable is happening elsewhere, is happening in New York City, or is happening in, wherever these urban places are. And that's the exciting part. And that's where, and you get there and you feel that you don't have, what you bring to the table isn't as valuable. And what I think I've realized over the years of having lived in a lot of urban places since I left is that what I bring to the table is especially valuable because it is something that you cannot, it's hard to relate to if you have never experienced it. And
Mm-hmm.
it gives a perspective that 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 makes for a better outcome. I can't I, and so it's but it's difficult, I think, sometimes when you're in an urban environment, you get so wrapped up in in
Yes,
the
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 culture.
the the culture of it and the speed of it, that
Yeah.
it's easy to be very insular and look down on what's outside of it and not see what those places have to offer, or those, you know, um, so that's sort of, it's sort of I remember one of my college roommates asked me if I grew up in a cave. I didn't know like the bands or the popular brands or whatever. That wasn't, that God, we had to order things from catalogs. We didn't even have, like, so, but, and so at the time, I feel terrible about myself. I'm like, oh, I'm not connected. I don't know the pulse of what's happening. But in retrospect, it's like, no, no, what you had was so valuable. Um,
Right.
there are things, for example, how do you walk on ice?
Hmm.
Like you learn that by living it. You don't, and or how do you walk on an on an uneven trail?
Hmm.
Someone was telling me that they were runners, and that they had to retrain people who had never run on trails because they kept breaking their ankles because they didn't know how to run on uneven surfaces. But these things, like, and not that I'm a runner, but these things come very naturally to me because this is the environment that I grew up in, and these are the skills that you learn unconsciously from
Right.
your place and how you integrate with your environment.
Mhm.
Um, and someone coming from an urban background doesn't get that. I mean, you're going to integrate with your
Right.
environment differently because it's a different environment. But
Yeah. And this is where I think you bring such a unique perspective, having so much experience going outside of all the different areas and actually living and immersing yourself in them. Because visiting a place or a city, a country is so much different than actually living there. And lived in 3 different states, and all of them were very different. They had very different cultures, very different people, very different mindsets. So going, even you've lived in different countries. That's entirely different language, an entirely different perspective of upbringing as well, different religions, different things that come in, different dynamics that come into play.
well, it's incredibly humbling is what it is. Like, you
Yeah.
realize how little you know and how much you have to learn and how much mm, yeah, how little our sphere of understanding can be, you know,
Right. Yeah.
and how many different ways there are to be in the world, and
Yeah.
how they are all rich and valuable, and
Mm.
it's humbling.
Yeah. Yeah, that part is wonderful, and that's why I always enjoy talking with you. And these are always very interesting conversation. I think we could go on forever on them, but I think we'll wrap it up just because of the
Mm.
time. But are there other things that you feel like that we could incorporate into the psychology of design just to move things forward in a more positive and healthful way?
Well, I'm working on some research called unconscious design bias, and it's the idea that your your life experience, the places you grew up, the environments you grew up in, um, your culture, your language, your religion, all of these factors are going to give you preferences in design. And that preferences not in terms of, yes, of course, in terms of aesthetics and color and texture and all of these things, but also in terms of space organization, angles or patterns, or all, like, everything that has to do with scale, all of these
Mhm.
things, into all the way up to urban design, all the way down into graphics, and like every layer of it. So it's understanding those biases and being able to value and appreciate the biases of others, and so that you are not rolling out a homogeneous one story narrative.
Right. Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm definitely very interested in that, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers are as well. So, is there a way that they can contact you if this is something they're interested in finding out more about?
Absolutely. I do have a presentation that I can share with people. They can reach me at my work email. It's Bonnie_Toland@ginsler.com. And hopefully this year we'll be awarded a grant to continue the research. And by the end of the year, we'll have something more to share as well.
That's wonderful. This is all really great. It's always, of course, wonderful talking with you and sharing insights on these areas, because they are such important areas that we really do need to have more conversations, and we really do need to find ways to address them that are approachable for society, for each person, because some of the ideas that come out sometimes are not as approachable as others. We need to find a way to move forward in a way that people feel comfortable in what works in
Yeah.
overall. So thank you for being with us. I think we're going to wrap it up here, but really
Thank you.
wonderful talking
Thank
with
you.
you.
Thank you. Always wonderful to talk with you.
Yeah, you take care.
You too. Bye.